Harsh, they mocked her accent until she became their boss. The elevator doors slid open on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, revealing a sleek lobby adorned with abstract art and the imposing logo of Nexus Technologies. Elena Vasquez stepped out her heels, clicking against the marble floor with a confidence that belied the flutter of nerves in her stomach. Today was different. Today, she wasn't here as the junior analyst they had mocked for 3 years. Today, she was here as their new vice president of operations. She paused at the glass doors, catching her reflection. The same face that had endured countless snickers and poorly concealed smirks now wore an expression of quiet determination. Her accent, that distinctive blend of her Mexican heritage and the years spent perfecting her English, had once been her greatest source of shame in these halls. Now it would be the voice that would reshape this entire division. "Good morning, Ms. Vasquez." The receptionist greeted her, eyes widening with recognition. The same receptionist who just 6 months ago had giggled behind her hand when Elena had pronounced algorithm with a rolled R during a presentation. "Good morning, Sarah," Elena replied, her voice steady and clear. She didn't try to hide her accent anymore. Why should she? It was part of who she was. The girl from Guadalajara who had worked 3 jobs to pay for her computer science degree, who had spent nights teaching herself English by watching technical tutorials, who had climbed from the factory floor where her mother still worked to the executive suite of one of Silicon Valley's most prestigious tech firms. The walk to the conference room felt both eternal and too brief. Through the glass walls, she could see them already assembled, the team that had made her professional life a subtle hell of condescension and exclusion. There was Marcus Chen, the senior developer, who had once suggested she might be more comfortable in customer service where communication skills weren't as critical. Beside him sat Jennifer Walsh, who had perfected the art of repeating Elena's ideas in meetings, but with clearer pronunciation, always earning the credit Elena deserved. And at the far end of the table, Brad Thornton. Brad, who had been so certain the VP position would be his, that he'd already been shopping for a new Tesla. Brad, who had once told her during a company happy hour that her accent made her sound cute like Sofia Vergara, but less suited for serious technical discussions. Elena's hand touched the door handle, and she allowed herself one deep breath. The memory that gave her strength wasn't from her recent triumph. It was from 5 years ago, standing in her mother's kitchen at 5 a.m., watching her mother pack lunch for another 16-hour shift at the assembly plant. "Mija," her mother had said, touching Elena's face with hands roughened by years of labor, "they will try to make you small because of how you speak. But remember, an accent means you speak more languages than they do. It means you've climbed mountains they've never even seen." The door opened and 11 pairs of eyes turned to her. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that feels alive with unspoken thoughts. Elena walked to the head of the table, the seat Brad had already half pulled out for himself, and set down her portfolio with deliberate calm. "Good morning, everyone," she began, letting her accent flow naturally with each word. "I know this comes as a surprise to some of you. 3 days ago, I was analyzing your deployment metrics from a cubicle on the 20th floor. Today, the board has entrusted me with leading this division through its most critical transformation yet." Brad's face had turned an interesting shade of red. Jennifer was studying her manicure with sudden intensity. Marcus looked like he was trying to solve a particularly complex equation in his head, probably calculating how this had happened. "But let me address what I'm sure you're all thinking," Elena continued, pulling up the first slide of her presentation. The screen filled with numbers, revenue projections, efficiency metrics, innovation indices, all pointing sharply downward. This division is failing. Not failing to meet expectations, actually failing. We've lost 3 major clients in 6 months. Our deployment efficiency is 34% below industry standard, and our innovation score dead, last among all Nexus divisions. She clicked to the next slide. It showed her own track record from her time as a junior analyst. Every project she'd touched had exceeded targets. Every recommendation she'd made, the ones that had been heard through the filter of her accent, had generated measurable improvements. "And the board didn't promote me because they wanted diversity points," she said, making direct eye contact with Brad. "They promoted me because, while you were all busy perfecting your pronunciation and your politics, I was perfecting our products." Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. She had been one of the worst offenders, constantly interrupting Elena in meetings to clarify what she was saying, even when Elena's English had been perfectly clear. Just last month, Jennifer had sent an email to the team lead suggesting that Elena might benefit from additional communication training before being considered for any client-facing roles. Ms. Walsh, Elena said, turning to her. You'll be leading the client retention task force. I need a comprehensive report on why we lost the Morrison account. And yes, you'll be presenting it to the board yourself. I trust your communication skills are up to the task. The color drained from Jennifer's face. The Morrison account loss had been primarily her responsibility. She'd mismanaged the relationship while being too busy playing office politics to notice their growing dissatisfaction. Mr. Chen, Elena continued, you'll be conducting a full audit of our development pipeline. I want to know why our deployment efficiency is so poor. And please, if any part of my request is unclear, don't hesitate to ask for clarification. Marcus nodded stiffly. He had once CC'd half the department on an email suggesting that language barriers were causing delays in the development cycle, when in reality Elena's reports had been the only ones submitted on time and error-free. And Brad, Elena said, finally turning to the man who looked like he'd swallowed something particularly bitter. You'll be working directly with me on the Davidson Industries proposal. They specifically asked for innovative solutions, and I believe it's time we delivered some. Working with you? Brad's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Is there a problem with that arrangement? Elena asked, her tone professionally neutral. Perhaps you'd prefer to explain to the board why you told Davidson's CEO last quarter that our diversity hires were slowing down our innovation. Interesting perspective considering those diversity hires have generated 67% of our patents in the last 2 years. The room had become so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Elena let the silence stretch, remembering all the times her ideas had been met with similar silence. Not the silence of respect, but of dismissal of people waiting for someone else to translate her thoughts into something they deemed worth hearing. Now, she said, pulling up the next slide, let's talk about the future of this division. We have 90 days to turn things around, or the board will consider dissolution. That means 90 days to prove that technical excellence matters more than accent perfection, that innovation trumps intonation, and that results speak louder than any language barrier you've imagined exists. She outlined her plan with the same precision she'd always brought to her work, but now without the self-consciousness that had once made her rush through presentations. Her accent colored every word, and she wore it proudly. It was the accent of someone who had learned English not in private schools, but from library books and YouTube videos, who had practiced pronunciation not with tutors, but with a mirror and endless determination. Questions, she asked when she finished. Jennifer raised her hand tentatively. When did you interview for this position? We didn't know you were being considered. Elena smiled, and it wasn't entirely kind. I interviewed 6 months ago when the board quietly began looking for someone who could save this division. You didn't know because you were all too busy forwarding emails, mocking my pronunciation of proprietary, to notice that I was meeting with board members to discuss proprietary solutions to our profit crisis. She pulled up another slide, screenshots of emails she wasn't supposed to have seen, the ones where her teammates had made fun of how she said development or suggested she needed subtitles. HR had been very interested in those during her interview process. Which brings me to my next point, Elena said. The culture of this division needs to change. We're implementing a new policy effective immediately. Any discrimination based on accent, nationality, or linguistic background will result in immediate termination. And yes, Brad making jokes about needing a translator counts as discrimination. Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He had been the worst offender, creating a whole series of memes about Elena's accent that he thought she didn't know about. Technology was wonderful and screenshots were forever. But more than policies, Elena continued, we need a culture shift. Do you know why I was analyzing our metrics from the 20th floor instead of up here with the rest of you? It wasn't because I lacked the skills or the insight. It was because every time I spoke in a meeting, half of you were so focused on how I said things that you never heard what I was saying. She clicked to a slide showing the global reach of Nexus Technologies offices in 43 countries, clients on every continent. We serve a global market, yet this division has operated like a country club. Well, the club is now under new management. Marcus cleared his throat. Elena, Ms. Vasquez, I owe you an apology. I was wrong. About a lot of things. It was a start, Elena thought. Not enough to erase 3 years of being overlooked and undermined, but a start. I appreciate that, Marcus. But I don't need apologies. I need excellence. I need each of you to bring to this division the same dedication you brought to marginalizing me, but channel it toward our actual competitors instead of your colleagues. She assigned the rest of the roles and responsibilities, each chosen to push her former tormentors out of their comfort zones and into positions where they'd have to deliver results, not just smooth talk. Brad would be interfacing with international clients. Let him see how it felt to be judged for his accent when speaking to executives in Tokyo or Munich. Jennifer would be presenting to the board monthly, no one to hide behind, no ideas to steal and repackage. Marcus would be working with the offshore development teams, time to see if his technical skills were as superior as he'd always claimed, or if he'd been coasting on credentials and connections. Hey, one more thing, Elena said as the meeting drew to a close. I'll be implementing monthly innovation sessions, where ideas are submitted anonymously and evaluated purely on merit. No names, no faces, no accents, just ideas. I'm curious to see if the same voices rise to the top when we remove bias from the equation. As her new direct reports filed out, Elena noticed Samantha Liu hanging back. Sam had been the only one who'd never participated in the mockery, though she'd never spoken up against it either. Yes, Sam, I just wanted to say, I'm glad you're here, really glad, and I'm sorry I never said anything before. I should have. Elena nodded. Standing up is hard. I understand that. But silence in the face of discrimination is its own choice. I hope moving forward you'll find your voice. Sam nodded and left, leaving Elena alone in the conference room. She walked to the window looking out over Silicon Valley, that promised land of innovation and meritocracy that had nearly crushed her spirit with its hidden hierarchies and unspoken biases. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother in Spanish. How did it go, Misha? They heard me, Mama, Elena texted back. For the first time, they really heard me. Over the following weeks, the transformation of the division was both painful and remarkable. Brad struggled with the international clients, at first stumbling over cultural nuances he'd never had to navigate before. In a video call with their Japanese partners, he experienced firsthand the polite but unmistakable dismissal that came with being seen as linguistically inferior. The irony wasn't lost on Elena when he came to her office afterward, shell-shocked and humbled. And they kept asking me to repeat myself, he said, sinking into the chair across from her desk. And when I tried to explain the technical specifications, they looked at me like I was stupid, like my ideas didn't matter because I couldn't communicate them the way they expected. Elena leaned back in her chair, studying him. Frustrating, isn't it? When your expertise is dismissed because of how you speak, rather than what you know. Brad had the grace to flush. I get it now. I'm starting to get it. Elena, Stop, she said firmly. I don't need your apology, Brad. I need your performance. The Yamamoto team expects a revised proposal by Friday. I suggest you focus on that. But she did pair him with Yuki, one of their Japanese-American developers, who had also faced her share of accent discrimination, not for having one, but for not having the right one when speaking Japanese. Together, they began to bridge the communication gap, and Brad learned to listen not just to words, but to meanings, to focus not on pronunciation, but on innovation. Jennifer's first board presentation was a disaster. Without the ability to hide behind others or repackage their ideas, she froze, stumbling over technical terms she'd never truly understood. The board members accustomed to polished presentations were visibly unimpressed. But Elena didn't swoop in to save her. Instead, she assigned Jennifer a mentor, Dr. Rashida Patel, whose thick Mumbai accent had never prevented her from becoming one of the most respected CTOs in the Valley. And your problem, Dr. Patel told Jennifer bluntly, is that you've spent so much time polishing your surface that you've neglected your substance. Elena could present with the thickest accent in the world and still command a room because she knows her material inside and out. You're all performance and no product. It was harsh, but it was what Jennifer needed to hear. She began actually studying the technical aspects of their work, staying late to understand the code she'd previously only pretended to comprehend, asking questions she'd once been too proud to voice. Marcus threw himself into working with the offshore teams with the obsessive focus of someone trying to atone for past sins. He discovered that the developers in Bangalore and Sao Paulo weren't just cheaper alternatives to local talent. They were brilliant engineers whose insights had been buried under layers of miscommunication and cultural bias. When he presented his findings on the development pipeline, he had to admit that many of the delays he'd attributed to communication issues were actually the result of the home team's failure to provide clear specifications and reasonable deadlines. Now, we've been handicapping ourselves, he told the assembled division. We have access to some of the best minds in the world, and we've been treating them like second-class contributors because they don't sound like us. Elena watched it all with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. Change was hard, and she was pushing her team to their limits. But the results were beginning to show. The anonymous innovation sessions revealed voices that had been silent for too long, not just international team members, but introverted local developers who'd been drowned out by louder colleagues, junior staff whose ideas had been dismissed due to hierarchy rather than merit. One idea in particular caught fire: a machine learning algorithm that could optimize deployment schedules across global teams, accounting for cultural holidays, time zones, and work style preferences. It came from Dinesh, a junior developer whose thick Telugu accent had made him nearly invisible in meetings. When implemented, it improved their efficiency by 23% in just 1 month. Why didn't you ever present this before? Elena asked him during their one-on-one meeting. Dinesh shrugged a gesture that spoke volumes. Every time I tried to speak in meetings, people would look confused even though I know my English is clear. After a while, I stopped trying. Elena felt the familiar ache of recognition. Well, you're trying now, and we're listening. The Davidson Industries proposal became the crucible that forged the new team dynamics. With Brad humbled by his international experiences, Jennifer grounded by her technical deep dives, and Marcus enlightened by his offshore collaborations, they began to work like an actual team for the first time. Elena pushed them relentlessly, but she also really listened to their ideas. What if we proposed a truly global solution? Brad suggested during one late-night session. Not just outsourcing, but actual integration. Their Asian markets are exploding, but their current system is too Western-centric. We could build something that adapts to local needs while maintaining global consistency. It was a good idea, more than good, it was brilliant. And it came from Brad's newfound appreciation for cultural differences, born from his own experience of being the outsider. Elena approved it, and they worked together to refine it with Brad, learning to value Elena's input not despite her accent, but because of the global perspective it represented. The presentation to Davidson Industries was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. The entire division gathered in the main conference room to watch via video link. Elena could feel the nervous energy this would make or break them. If they won the contract, it would prove that their new approach worked. If they lost it, the board would likely shut them down. Elena stood at the head of the virtual conference room, looking at the faces of Davidson's executive team on the screen. She saw their slight surprise when she introduced herself. They'd been expecting Brad, the smooth-talking sales guy who'd bungled their relationship so badly. Instead, they got Elena with her rolled R's and distinctive cadence. Good afternoon, she began, not trying to hide or modify her accent. I'm Elena Vasquez, VP of Operations at Nexus Technologies. I'm here today not just to present a solution, but to demonstrate a philosophy that diversity of thought and global perspective aren't buzzwords, but the key to solving your challenges. She walked them through the proposal with Brad, Jennifer, and Marcus, each presenting their portions. The transformation in her team was evident. Brad spoke with newfound cultural sensitivity. Jennifer demonstrated deep technical knowledge, and Marcus highlighted innovations from their global team members with genuine enthusiasm. But it was when Dinesh presented his algorithm that the Davidson executives really leaned in. His accent was thick, his nervousness palpable, but his brilliance undeniable. Elena watched as the executives asked increasingly complex questions, and Dinesh fielded them all with growing confidence. This is exactly what we need, Davidson's CEO, Patricia Chen, said when they finished. A solution that doesn't just acknowledge our global presence, but embraces it, and a team that reflects the markets we serve. They won the contract, not just the basic service agreement, but an expanded partnership worth 3 times what they'd initially hoped for. As the call ended and the conference room erupted in cheers, Elena felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Brad. Thank you, he said simply, for showing us what we were missing, for being better than we deserved. Elena looked at him, really looked at him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something more valuable: understanding. We all have room to grow, Brad. The question is whether we're willing to do the work. 6 months later, Elena stood before the board of directors, presenting the division's results. The numbers told a story of transformation, client retention, up 45% efficiency, improved by 38% innovation scores, leading all Nexus divisions. But the real story was in the faces of her team assembled in the boardroom, a team that had learned to hear beyond accents, to value substance over style, to find strength in their differences. Ms. Vasquez, the chairman, said his own British accent crisp and pronounced, "This is remarkable. How did you achieve such a turnaround?" Elena smiled, thinking of her mother's words that morning so many months ago. By remembering that an accent is not a barrier, it's a bridge. Every different voice in our division represents a different market, a different perspective, a different solution. We stopped trying to make everyone sound the same and started listening to what they were actually saying. And the team culture, no, another board member asked. We heard there were some challenges with the transition. Change is always challenging, Elena acknowledged. But my team rose to the occasion. They learned that mocking someone's accent doesn't make your own ideas better, it just makes you smaller. They discovered that true leadership isn't about speaking perfectly, but about communicating effectively. And most importantly, they realized that in a global economy, monolithic thinking is a luxury we can't afford. The board approved her request for additional resources and gave her team commendations for their turnaround. As the meeting concluded, board members approached her individually, several commenting on how refreshing it was to see such dramatic results. Dr. Williams, the longest-serving board member, pulled her aside. "You know, Elena, when we first interviewed you, some members were concerned about your communication style. I'm ashamed to admit I was one of them. I've been in Silicon Valley for 30 years, and I'd forgotten that innovation doesn't have a preferred accent." "We all have our biases, Dr. Williams," Elena replied graciously. "The key is recognizing them and choosing to do better." As she left the boardroom, Elena's phone buzzed with messages from her team. They were celebrating at the usual spot, the same bar where Brad had once compared her to Sofia Vergara, where Jennifer had suggested she take speech classes, where Marcus had questioned whether clients would take her seriously. Now they were texting her to hurry up, that the first round was on Brad, that Dinesh was going to present his newest innovation idea, that they had invited the offshore teams to join virtually. Elena stood in the elevator watching the floors tick by and thought about the journey. She had started as a girl from Guadalajara, who was too ashamed of her accent to speak up in class. She had become a woman who led with that same accent, who had turned her perceived weakness into her greatest strength. When she arrived at the bar, her team erupted in applause. Not the polite corporate applause of obligation, but genuine celebration. Brad raised his glass, and the others followed suit. To Elena, he said, "Who taught us that leadership speaks many languages, but results need no translation." They drank, and Elena felt the weight of the past finally lifting. She hadn't just changed their minds, she had changed their hearts. And in doing so, she had changed herself, from someone who apologized for her voice to someone who used it to transform an entire division. Later that night, after the celebrations had wound down and the team had dispersed, Elena sat in her office one last time before the weekend. The view from the 42nd floor was spectacular. The valley spread out below her like a circuit board of dreams and ambitions. She video called her mother, who was just getting ready for her shift at the plant. "I'm proud of you, Mija," her mother said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But I always knew this day would come. You have your father's brain and my stubbornness. That's a powerful combination in any language." Elena laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "The funny thing is, Mama, I spent so much time trying to change my voice, but in the end, it was my voice exactly as it is that changed everything. Never forget that, Elena. Your accent tells the story of where you've been, and that story is what makes you powerful." As she ended the call and prepared to leave, Elena looked at the presentation she'd prepared for Monday, a company-wide initiative on inclusive communication and global integration. The board had asked her to roll out her approach across all divisions. More challenges, more resistance, more minds to change. But she was ready. She thought about all the Dineshs out there, brilliant minds silenced by bias. All the international team members whose ideas were lost in translation, not because of language barriers, but because of cultural ones. All the young women and men who, like her younger self, sat in meetings, paralyzed by the fear that their accent made them less than. Monday would begin a new chapter, but tonight was for reflection. Elena Vasquez, the girl with the accent they had mocked, had become the woman whose voice they couldn't ignore. And she was just getting started. As she walked through the now quiet offices past the cubicle where she had once hidden her brilliance, past the conference rooms where she had been overlooked and underestimated, Elena made herself a promise. She would use her position not just to succeed, but to ensure that no one else would have to fight as hard as she had just to be heard. The security guard at the front desk, Carlos, whose Salvadoran accent was even thicker than hers, smiled as she passed. "Good night, Ms. Vasquez. Thank you for everything." She paused, understanding the weight of his words. "Good night, Carlos, and remember your voice matters too." Outside, the California air was crisp with possibility. Elena walked to her car, no longer the beat-up Honda she'd driven as a junior analyst, but a modest Tesla. Not because she needed the status symbol, but because she believed in sustainable technology. Some things had changed, but her values remained constant. As she drove home, she passed by the community college, where she had taken her first programming classes, where a kind professor had told her that her accent was an asset, not a liability. She made a mental note to set up a scholarship program, the Elena Vasquez Fund for International Students in Technology. It was time to pay it forward. Her phone rang a number she didn't recognize with an international prefix. She answered, curious, "Ms. Vasquez. This is Liu Wei from our Shanghai office. I heard about what you've done with the Western Division. I was wondering, would you consider expanding your approach globally? We have similar challenges here, but with Mandarin speakers, facing discrimination in English-dominated meetings." Elena smiled, pulling over to give the conversation her full attention. "Tell me more, Mr. Liu. I'm listening." And she was. Because that's what leaders did. They listened. They heard not just words, but possibilities, not just accents, but innovations, not just differences, but strengths. As she talked with Liu Wei about creating a truly global culture of inclusion, Elena realized that her story was not ending, but expanding. They had mocked her accent until she became their boss. But becoming their boss was just the beginning. Now she was becoming something more, a voice for all voices, a bridge between worlds. A leader who understood that the future of technology, like the future of humanity, spoke in many accents, but shared one language, the language of respect, innovation, and relentless pursuit of excellence. The girl from Guadalajara had become a force in Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley would never sound the same again.